overview of the Bible, the book of Ruth. The very first kind of thing that we need to address is that date when it was written. And sometimes it is like, who is the author? There is a traditional statement that goes through Christian tradition, and it's kind of absorbed from a Jewish tradition. In the Talmud, it says that the Samuel was the author of Ruth. It is possible, so that puts the date of writing in roughly 1050. Okay? All of you remember our good old timeline that we used to draw many lessons before. Okay? So if this is 30 AD, roughly, okay, give or take, and this is not a plus, this is T, so it's time. Okay, so if any of you thought that I always put the plus over there, and this is minus, no, it's T, it's time. So we have 45 BC. What do we have in 45 BC? Who remembers? Huh? Exodus, yes. Yeah, you can be more bold. You were installed as an LWML officer, so your word now is much more valuable than anything else, you know. But now we go a little bit, you know, toward Calvary, and roughly in about 1,000 years BC, we have what? Temple built. Okay, we have two things about the temple. This is temple built. Okay, therefore, if we are talking about Samuel and David, and this is built by whom? Who is the guy who built the temple? Solomon. Who prepared all the material. Solomon had never ever ran into a chain supply problem. It was not on his horizon whatsoever. Why? Because his dad, and his dad is who? David. Okay, so one more king before David, he prepared everything. We have lists of his stuff. If you go into historical books, if you go into like 2 Samuel, or if you go into 1 Chronicles, there is like a gold, blah, so much. And it's huge numbers. Silver, even more. Then it's copper, even more. And then it says iron with no count. So it was like just, you know, I don't know, piles of, you know, iron that they would use for nails and for all of this kind of stuff. So he prepped for David, prepared everything. Therefore, knowing that the David reign was about 40 years, that places us roughly into 1050 BC, because we go this way with numbers, you understand. Why do we need to have David for Book of Ruth? Because at the very end, who do we find in the Book of Ruth in chapter 4? The lineage goes from parents to
daughters.
To what? Who is the last guy who is named in the book of Ruth? David. Okay? But there is an interesting thing. It says not David the king. Okay? Therefore, it is possible that if it's Samuel, that it was written before he was officially introduced to be the king. He was already anointed, but if you remember, there was an overlap for about like 20 years when he was chased by Saul, who was still was like sitting on the throne, even though he knew that David is the anointed guy. So we have overlap in the reign. So maybe the book of Ruth was written somewhere here. Okay? Now, as you always need to note, there is a date of writing and there is a date of narrative. Okay? So the book of Ruth does not talk about these times. We'll talk about this in a second. Where do we need to place the narrative of the book of Ruth? But this is one possibility for authorship. There is a second possibility, actually. Okay. If you'll go, stay with me in the 4th chapter. The 4th chapter begins, the verse, I'm sorry, not the 4th chapter, but this passage. Verse 18. Now, these are the generations of whom? Peretz. Okay? So we have a guy named Peretz. Okay? And we end with David. Okay? What do you know about Perez?
One of the tribes of Israel.
He's what?
Isn't it one of the tribes of Israel in that corner?
No, we do not have a tribe of Perez.
It was the great grandfather of David.
Cool, that's nice to count, yes. What else do you know? Okay, don't worry about that. Nobody knows almost anything. The cool thing about that, but we know about his father. And his father is Judah. And I'll talk today that actually we do have two stories kind of coming together, and both of them are odd stories. But in the book of Ruth, both of those odd stories find their redemption. So, it's very interesting to see that we have Guy 1 and David is 10th. Okay? But we have one guy before Perez that we need to pay attention to. So everybody, when they've heard name Perez, immediately thought about Judah. Okay? So therefore, it kind of forces us to think maybe whoever author was, he very scholarly, or not scholarly, very beautifully and sophisticatedly points us by bringing up the guy before he points out to the guy after. Okay? So if we know about Perez, we need to think about one before. If we hear about David, we need to think about one after, which is Solomon. So that's a second possibility for the writing of the book of Ruth. Okay, I didn't put it in my notes, but for you, I want you to know that there is another possibility that people put the writing of Ruth really way after exile, because they see it as a political, what would be the word, brochure against the rules in Jerusalem when, so they use that example as fictional example. They don't believe, those guys do not believe that what happened in the book of Ruth is real thing, but they use this fictional example to kind of go against current politics in Jerusalem. So don't worry about that. It's just another piece of whatever. Never mind. Yeah, say fluff. Yeah, let's say fluff. Yes, yeah. Good. That those stuff which is warm, brown, and squishy. Yes, right, exactly.
Yes.
Okay, now, going back here. Now, the narrative. When it happened, if we read very carefully, we have few clues. First of all, the book begins with a very interesting phrase. When judges ruled, or actually, they should have preserved the play of words. When judges judged. Okay, so those two words, whatever you have in your translation, should be from the same root. Okay? Because it's judges, and what do? They judge. Okay? Yes, I know Supreme Court passed the ruling, okay, and that's why they used it. I understand. But ideally, to kind of preserve that, it's important. There is also another interpretation where judges were judged. Okay? So they did not judge good, therefore there was judgment on them. And that's very interesting. Why? Because the following phrase, there was a famine in the land. And the men from Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn to the country of Moab. Okay, cool thing. I mean, if you were reading the Hebrew text, you would laugh out loud right now. Why? Because there are judges that either they judge poorly or they are under judgment. Therefore, there was a famine in the land, and the guy from Bethlehem. What's Bethlehem?
City of bread.
City of bread. So you have a famine in the city of bread. Okay? That's hilarious. There is something that should trigger your attention. It's like, why? What's going on? Why do we have famine in the land, and the guy from Bethlehem, from the city, from actually house of bread, goes to where? Where is he going to? Moab. Now, you need to remember one interesting story. When we almost go into the land, this is Moab. So it's east of Promised Land, let's put it this way. So the people came through here. anything related to bread. Do you remember any story that is related to bread while Israelites of Exodus passed through Moab?
No.
Manna was falling from heaven, yes. Anything else related to Moab specifically?
Wasn't that the place where they stopped and they asked for help from the people there?
For bread, and were they
Was
given
not-
bread or not?
No.
No.
They were not.
So, first of all,
Very bad.
we have famine in the land, and the guy from the house of bread goes into the place where they were not given bread. So it's like fully pointless. It's ridiculous. You don't go to Moab for bread according to the Bible. Just don't. You know, okay? I don't know. I don't want to bring any current, examples from, I don't want to bring any examples from current political situation, Just, you don't go to Moab for bread. Where do you go for bread? In the Bible, we have, in Genesis, that's what actually parallels the book of Ruth with Genesis. In Genesis, we have at least 3 famines. Where do people go in case of the lack of bread? Egypt.
Right.
Or in the second case, they went to Philistia. But Philistines, and I put it in my handouts, Philistia are relatives of Egyptians. It's actually a grandson of Egypt. So if you go into Genesis 10, it's all explained. It's right there, and you have it in your notes. So you go this way, you go southwest, you don't go east. One more thing. If you go east of the land, does that trigger anything? Is this problematic?
Terrible desert.
East of Eden.
What?
Adam and Eve.
Went east of Edom, okay? And then there's one of their sons kills another son, and Cain moves
East.
eastward. So in the Bible, whenever you move eastward,
You're in trouble.
it's like at least your eyebrows should be like, what? So it's kind of problematic. You can begin to ask correct questions. Therefore, when Elimelech, and that's another fun story, the guy's name is Elimelech, and you should tell me. Okay, El, what is El? God, okay? E is mine, okay? What's Melech? It's the king. So my God is king. So the guy who claims that he is God is king, so he submits to him as to the king, moves out of the territory in the land of Moab. He goes eastward with 2 of his sons. If you go eastward from territory of the Lord, instead of repentance, you move somewhere else where definitely they are not going to care for you. We know it. And they are not going to provide. What's going to happen? You're going to die. So not a surprise that Elimelech and 2 of his sons are dead. Okay, that's where we find basically the whole setting. We kind of jump through those first 5 verses, but that's where that's the setting. Now, Naomi and 2 of her daughters-in-law, because those guys even married the foreigners. Okay, Orpah and Ruth. Okay, everybody knows that the very prominent TV star Oprah, her name comes from Orpah because her mom just misspelled the biblical name. Okay?
Yes.
So, great.
Right.
But the problem is that in the Bible, now I messed up. Who is the biblical character? Orpah. Yeah, right? Yeah, I'm right. Okay.
Right.
So, she symbolically dies on the way to Bethlehem because they cry for each other. They exchange the last farewell kisses. It does not mean that God took her life, but she moves out of the story and we do not know anything about her. Again, she symbolically dies. She parts ways with Naomi and with Ruth. She goes back to Moab and we don't know anything about her. Okay, she never ever, her name is never ever is picked up in the rest of the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament included. Okay, with Ruth, she goes with Naomi, and that's where she, on the way, she claims this wonderful phrase that everybody knows, and that will be your memory verse that you need to submit next time before you come to communion. So those who will not be recited, sorry.
Hold on now.
But seriously, many songs are written on that verse. There are hymns, there are songs. If you have ever heard Leonard Cohen's song, that your people will be my people, and so on, listen, it's kind of interesting interpretation. He has very interesting interpretation. But what she says, Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return to the from following you. For where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people. Your God, my God." And that's so far so good, because God is somewhat generic term. Now, the more fun comes. Where you die, I will die. And that's where I will be buried. May the Lord, and that's where she invokes the covenant name of God. Really personal. As a Jew. She's a Moabite. Okay, she's never called a Jewish woman in the book. 6 times she is called Moabite, Ruth the Moabite, and 1 time she identifies herself as in Hebrew it's Nechreya, it means I'm a stranger. I'm someone not from this land, in chapter 2. But now, she appeals to this God, the God of life, because the Lord, Yahweh, okay, we kind of not dare to say it, or sometimes we do dare to say it. It comes from the verb haya, which is to live, L-I-V-E, not leave, but I hope that distinction is clear with my pronunciation. So he's the living one. He's the one who is constantly alive. He's not simply existing. He's not simply present. He is alive. Okay? So she invokes his name. So may the Lord do so and so to me and more if anything but death parts from me. Okay? Parts you and me. Okay. So that's an important part. So 2 of them come to Bethlehem. And as you see in your outline, it says that testimony of women, the point D, chapter 1, 19b to 22. Why it's women? It is women, trust me. The only reason you do not know it, and I would know it either, because neither in English nor in Russian, the third person plural verbs have a have, what's that? Gender? No. Gender identification, okay? So in our language, in English, they is they, okay? It's just they. Whoever, in Hebrew, if it's bunch of ladies, it's they, and there is a feminine ending. If it's bunch of boys, it's they, but it's masculine ending. And it's very funny. If it's bunch of ladies and 1 guy present, it's masculine ending. Okay? So, therefore, knowing that they spoke to Naomi, and the whole verbiage there is feminine, it was place where apparently kind of like a marketplace or well or something like that, where women would get together and share their news. That's where probably there will be a radio, NPR, broadcasting and telling them what to think and what to do. So, okay, now, notice that in chapter 1, verses 19 to the end, women speak to Naomi. They do not neither talk to Ruth, nor even kind of acknowledge as in the third person, singular. She is absent from their, balloon, okay? Interesting. But now the kind of recovery begins. So we are in the central point. Chapter 2 and chapter 3 form the parallel. And in the middle of both of those parallels are phrases about the wing of the Lord, wing of Yahweh. The first in chapter 2, so Naomi sends Ruth to glean, to pick up the leftovers of what guys during harvest didn't gather. Okay? She sent her and she ends up on the field of their relative, Boaz. And the Boaz is a very great guy. He is a very interesting character. Notice how he greets his workers. Chapter 2, verse 4. Anybody?
The Lord be with you.
The Lord be with you. Sounds familiar, right? Where do you hear it? In the church. That's how pastor proclaims that the Lord is with his ear. The Lord be with you. It's not a wish. It's not a Star Wars stuff. May the force be with you. No. That's the thing that states he is with us. Okay? Again, it's not a wish. The grammar structure shows that it's just a statement of the fact. Okay? The Lord be with you. Okay? And how do they respond?
Bless you.
And the Lord bless you. Okay? So, interesting. It's not only him who is godly, but he trained his workers to acknowledge the ultimate reign of the Lord, of Yahweh. Okay, in our New Testament context would be Jesus. So it's not only he is the guy who is the great leader, who is ethical and liturgical, let's put it this way. So there are both things. He is ethical on horizontal level. He is ethical with his people, and he is ethical. He is well recognized as a somewhat authority by the elders of the town. We'll get to that in a second in chapter 4. But he also builds up a proper relationship on the vertical level with God. And not only with himself, but he teaches to everybody else. And his ethical goodness goes beyond the measures of the law. Because when he acknowledges Ruth, what he does at the very end of chapter 2, he tells to his workers, not gather sheaves, okay? Not simply do that, but drop some of the stuff for her. Okay? So leave even more. So it's according to the law. Whatever they didn't pick up,
That's her job.
that's her. She's allowed to pick it up. Okay, it's not her job, but she has right to that. He increases. He is ready to sacrifice some of his own. He drops more purposefully. So when Jesus talks that your righteousness should be more than righteousness of Pharisees and Sadducees, that's the example he draws on. Okay? So that's the thing. Now, in the middle of the chapter 2, he approaches her and he tells her, let's look, I think it's verses 11 and 12. But Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward will be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Okay? So he points to God. God will make sure, God will provide, and you will find a refuge under his wings. Okay, so it's kind of like Psalm 17. There are other passages that we can invoke. And even in Jesus' words, we have very interesting phrase, remember, but it's more like in a sad context. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that stones the prophets. How many times I wanted to gather you? Like hand gathers his cheeks under where? Wings. Okay? So that's a protective space. That's a protected space. Okay? But you were not willing. It's not the God's responsibility. It's not the God's fault. It's because you were not willing to do that. Okay? So here he points to the similar idea. You want to find refuge under his wings. Okay? Now, what happened is, Now, the second part, we go as a reverse of the story, chapter 3. Again, Naomi sends her. There is a conversation between Ruth and Boaz, and then she reports to Naomi. Same as in chapter 2. So the basic structure of chapter 2 and 3 are the same. So in the middle of chapter 3, what do we find? It's so very interesting. Let's see. So, verse 8 and 9. At midnight, the man, Boaz, was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lays by his feet. Okay, so it's Boaz and Ruth. And he said, "Who are you?" Okay, why did he say that? Because they didn't have a light. He has no clue. He's in the barn. They just celebrated the end of the harvest. He enjoyed some wine, and we have it in the story. It's really true. He didn't get drunk, absolutely. I mean, he was not an alcoholic. He just enjoyed it, you know. And instead of going home, he went on the barn, on the top. He has a great time. Now he wakes up and here's a girl. It's like, "Who are you?" And it's dark. And she said, now, be very careful what she says. And she answered, "I'm Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings." Okay? Over your servant, for you are, and there is a word goel in Hebrew, it's redeemer. So in some translations you will find close relative, true but not close enough. The redeemer is a good translation. Okay, so now he tells her, "You will find refuge under wings of Yahweh." And whose personal abilities God uses to stretch those wings? Boaz. So, small warning. When you pray for people, "I want to help them, God, please provide for them," God will use you to provide for them. That's a simple lesson right there. So, I don't want to discourage you of praying, but just be careful, So, the point is, they got together. There is a whole long tradition of kind of going back and forth. Did anything happen between them and something not happen within them? I don't believe anything happened. The reason I do not believe is because what he says in the verse 10. He said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter, for you have made this last kindness greater than the first, and that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich." Okay? So he blesses for her, and the kindness is not a good translation. There is a great word that you need to know from Hebrew, and you probably have seen it sometimes. Okay, hesed. Sometimes it's spelled with C first, but sometimes not. So it's hesed. It means loving kindness, mercy, being graceful, being faithful. It's all together. So your hesed type acts are great. The thing is, you do not say it to a woman who kind of brought herself to another guy. Okay? Usually it's other type of relationship. And that's where an important understanding of the whole story comes into. As I told you, in the book of Ruth, we have a redemption of two important stories. One story, and you have it in your notes, one story began in Genesis 19, and another story began, let me do it from there. Let me turn it and we'll do it on the other side. Oops, nope, we will not. Okay, we'll do it from this way. So one story began, okay, that's a bummer. So Genesis 19, and another story began in Genesis 38. Okay, in Genesis 19, who do we have? We have Lot and his daughters. That's the basic foundational passage for an understanding where Moabites come from. Moabites come from the union in the very full sense of that word, of Lot and his older daughter. They got, both daughters decided, okay, we are kind of strangers in this land, so let's get our dad drunk. And the first night, older said, I will be with him, and the next night, younger will be with him. I don't know, guys. I've heard some attempts to justify Lot. He was drunk, he didn't know what happened. I mean, being somewhat old and married guy, I don't know how drunk you have to be not to understand what's going on, since only 2 of your girls are next to you. And if you are so drunk that you have no clue what's going on, I'm sorry, as a man I probably would not be able to perform. Maybe he was different, but that's either you are that type of drunk or you somewhat know what's going on. And I believe he knew what's going on. So that's a somewhat nasty story. And we have a Moabite girl right here again. Okay? So that story of chapter 3 looks somewhat suspicious, but let me finish that. Okay, what about Genesis 38? Genesis 38 is a story about Judah and how Peretz, the guy who is mentioned in this chronology in chapter 4 of Ruth, was begotten. He had actually a twin brother. Who gave them birth? Is Judah and who? Tamar. Tamar. Tamar, who was actually a wife of his older son, the previous son who died, and then the second son died, and instead of giving her as a levirate marriage kind of forces him to do, he saved his third son. But when Judah, saw a cult prostitute on the road, he kind of was, okay, let's have some fun. He did not know it was his daughter-in-law. And from that union, we have Peretz. So we have 2 very, at least, odd stories. And that's why, if you understand it right, what Boaz says, we see the redemption of these stories in chapter 3. You did it godly. You laid with, but there is nothing happened between them. To make sure that that's where we need to think, look in chapter 4. In chapter 4 of Ruth, it says, verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And then, very interesting phrase appears, at least in ESV. And he went into her. Okay? That's the time when they had intimate relationship. Okay? Not in chapter 3. Not before marriage. So that's important. They did everything godly. They were able to redeem both of those 2 lineages, somewhat ugly, but that's important. So what happens further, in chapter 4, he gathers together the elders of the land. And the interesting thing, the guy appears at the gates of the city, and we've talked about this. The gates of the city is an important place that's where, it's kind of like our White House, whatever it is, state White House, city council, on a smaller scale. So it's kind of like let's say, city council. So when he approaches elders, they say, yeah, let's look for your case, not for somebody else's case. Therefore, he was a respected guy in the community. Okay? If he would be some kind of, drunkard, or the guy who would go chase after other women, as might be presented by, some people understand chapter 3 that way, they would not do that, most likely. He is seen as a good leader, good member of the society, godly guy, and that's very interesting. If you would read it at home, very carefully. It's very interesting how he builds up the story. Because what he tells is, here's Naomi, all of you know, she came back. Her brother our brother, Elimelech, was her husband. He died in the Moabitic land. It's a very sad story. So here's the guy who should have recovered the field through the levirate marriage. And the guy says, oh, I'll take a field. I'll be fine. And then he brings up the case of Ruth. If you're going to do that, there is actually one more thing. You need to take her as a wife. And if she will have a son, you're going to be responsible for his education and upbringing for the next few years. Okay? And the guy said, no, I'm pulling out. I'm not going to do that. Okay. Then, fair square, they exchange their greetings. They exchange their shoes. Okay? Sandals. Okay? Why? Because the sandal is the thing that protects you from the dust. What's the problem with dust? Always remember, you always need to remember Genesis 3:17. Cursed is the land for you. So when you have a dust, that's why you have a ritual of washing of feet. It's not for hygienic cleaning only. It's first of all spiritually and symbolically. This ritual is symbolic. Because whenever we have dirty feet, it's a reminder of what happened in the garden. How Adam screwed up, big time. Okay? So they exchange their protectors from the curse. Therefore, if one fails his side of the promise, he would not be protected. Okay? So like if I walk in, I don't know, we have an agreement with Charlie, and we exchange, a shoe. So if I disregard our agreement and kinda pull myself out of the agreement, so that means I walk at least one foot as a barefoot, because I do not need his, I do not recognize his involvement into agreement. Okay? You understand how it works? That's what it is. And then we have kind of going really fast back. I didn't put the verses here. Sorry, my bad, on B. So first of all, there is the birth of the son. And therefore, it's kind of anti-death. Again, one more time. Orpah, and I put it here, death of Orpah, but it's a symbolic death. She didn't die. She didn't drop dead. Okay? But from the history of redemption standpoint, she disappears. She's not there. Therefore, she's symbolically dead. But the son is an anti-death story. Because in one verse we have Boaz took Ruth, she became his wife, he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore. In one verse, we kind of run through all of that immediately. Why? Because this birth is so important. Why? Because we begin in the very beginning, we see the famine in the land. And so it's a barren land, okay? And we also see how 3 guys are dying. Okay, now we have another guy, we have this boy who will pick up the future of Israel. And then Naomi is restored because she is visited by Yahweh. That's what ladies, again, tell her, And then the very end, we have genealogy of this guy, Peretz. And that brings us to David. Now, few lessons from there. I'm not going to go through all of them, but it is important. If you'll go through the handout one more time, you'll see. I put it like few times in the different sentences. That the book of Ruth is very important, like overall. That's probably I should have begun with. Book of Ruth tells us of how a stranger comes into as what we confess in the creed. Is communion of saints, okay? Community of believers. And it is very important to notice that book of Ruth teaches us about acceptance, but not about being inclusive. What's the difference between being acceptive and not inclusive, or inclusive? Okay? In our modern situation, to be inclusive means to take people, include people as they are. To accept people, you accept them on some kind of grounds. And that's what the memory verse is for. Okay? What Ruth confesses. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. I'm very happy that we are a very accepting congregation. But we accept people on their profession of faith. When they join us, they will be like one of us. It's not we need to turn and become one of them. Okay, that's very important. We are welcoming, we are lovely, we are lively, we are all of that, but it is important to understand when you accept people, and on the basis of Book of Ruth you can see that. She is the one who goes into the fellowship of believers. She is the one who is transformed, okay? And she accepts the rules that are in Israel, okay? Thank you. Questions or comments?